when you were at Prudential, like what led you into your next role at Prudential, or your next job at a different firm?
Yeah, so I stayed at Prudential for 8 years. They treated me very, very well. Towards the end, I think in the latter 90s, they sponsored me to go for my executive MBA, where I went to NYU.
Okay.
Which again was another transformational experience for me. And then the reality was I was doing a reverse commute going from, at the time I lived at Hoboken, and I was traveling out to Parsippany. And it was really not so much a meritocracy in terms of how pay worked.
Right.
And I had kind of came to understand how a couple of my colleagues were being paid, and it was similar to me, and I obviously thought I was doing a better job, and there was no differentiation. And as luck would have it, search firm called and asked if I was interested in chatting with an investment bank in their real estate group. I said absolutely, and I went in there, and that ended up being Morgan Stanley. So I interviewed there, and again I met some of the smartest people that I've ever met in my life. Again, but that were just really good people, and I was lucky enough to get a job offer there, and started in New York City and at 1585 Broadway. And again, in early and out late was a kind of repeating theme. The work experience there was just incredibly interesting, very different to what I was doing at Prudential. And again, I was working with people that were high intensity, high octane all the time. And it was just a great match for me at that point in my life and at that point in my career.
Awesome. We got a shout out. You rattled off a couple names as well as a couple of companies. We got to shout them out. So shout out to Gary, John, and the Joes that were influential to you. And shout out to Prudential as well as NYU's MBA program. I'm sure you're a proud Sterney. And shout out to Morgan Stanley. So you touched on your experience there and the people you met. That's no surprise to anybody. Those are fine institutions, especially the last one you just named. So it sounds like you had a really, really good experience there. So what led you to getting the job you have now? And have you always been an asset manager? Let's bridge that gap. You're working for an investment bank, and now you're working for private equity. But what happened in between that Morgan Stanley to BGO timeframe?
Yeah, so it's funny. I ended up working for 2 years at Morgan Stanley in New York, and then they asked if I was interested to move to Asia. And at the time, I was engaged to the woman that's now my wife, but we went out to take a tour because the job was going to be based in Hong Kong. And we both decided that it would be great, for me to explore that. And I can't say thank you enough for her support, because had she not been, my story would be very different. And we ended up moving, where I moved to Hong Kong first in August of 2004. And I was covering Asia Pacific extra-N, right? And so we spent a lot of time in mainland China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and then ultimately Australia. And spending that much time there, we started getting very active in mainland China. In early 2006, they asked if we would relocate to Shanghai, where Morgan Stanley at the time did not have any investment ID licenses. So we literally opened up the first Morgan Stanley office in mainland China. And we brought 10 people up to China, and then we ultimately had a team of 80 that we hired over the next, I think it was 18 months. Wow. So we had a fully functioning, Shanghai office, which again was phenomenal, right? To kind of drink through a fire hose and learn how to navigate a foreign land with a legal system that was not black and white was an incredible learning experience for me. It was incredibly humbling, learning patience and relaxing and understanding culture. Like all of those things were incredibly valuable. When I worked for Morgan Stanley out there, I ended up working for Sonny Kelsey, who is now, the co-CEO of BGO. And so I developed a great relationship with Sonny, respected him incredibly as not only as a manager, but as a leader and as an investor. and really, enjoyed all of the time that I spent there. And Sonny was critically important in building out the entire Asia infrastructure and framework for Morgan Stanley's real estate business at the time. And so, we were incredibly active all over the region, got to know all of our competitors really well. And as you kind of worked through the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, a lot of senior people ended up starting to depart Morgan Stanley, Sonny being one of them. It was probably a lot less fun place to work for me personally. And at that point, I decided to resign, to step down, and I started my own business. And we did a couple of things. One, we were looking at investing in India, where I had the former head of Morgan Stanley's India business had also left, and we put some money together and started an advisor business there. And then the other one was just my separate business was focused on capital advisory work across Asia Pacific. And so we did a bunch of that. Fast forward that a couple of years, I struck up another consulting agreement with Sonny and what at the time was called BGO. And then, fast forward, I think that was another 5.5 years since I had started it. This happened, I think, in January of 2012 when it started, and then I ended up, I think we came back for a family trip in December of 2016. And, my wife is an only child. My in-laws, my kids are their only grandchildren. They were in their early 80s. My mother had lost my dad, was on her own. And we kind of just made the decision that it's the right time to come back. And I'll never forget, we were on a ski trip in December of 16. We landed in Singapore, January of 17. And the first call I made was to Sonny, and I said, I think I'm going to relocate back after the school year is out. If there's an angle to work together, that would be great. And if not, no big deal. So again, I used to see Sonny usually for lunch once over the summer, and then usually once during the holidays. And he said, look, this could be interesting. He's like, why don't you come and meet the team when you come back, which I did. And then fast forward those discussions a little bit more, and then Sonny called me and he's like, I have good and bad news. The good news is we'd like to have you come back and be head of asset management. The bad news is you're the only asset manager.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
And all cradle to grave investing. And,
Wow.
And I kind of said, look, that seems like an ideal fit, and I jumped in, and it was literally like coming home.
Your Majesty! What are you doing here?
A bunch of personalities that I knew already. I understood the sense of urgency, the intensity, the focus, etc. Which, as an entrepreneur, as a one-man band, on your own in doing capital advisory work, this is very different. And it was great. And so I kind of hit the ground running when I returned in July of 17 and joined these guys. And then that, went through, and we ended up merging with Bento Kennedy, which ultimately then became BGO. And again, a job for me as head of asset management for a U.S. business, which is very sizable and noteworthy now, which has been a great end result, for me personally.
Wow, man. That's a great story. We're gonna clap. We're gonna clap it up. We gotta clap it up.